So I've lived in America for 12 years now. 4 years at college from 2002 to 2006, and then coming to 8 years here at the Abbey since 2012. And in recent years, people have been asking me, both at the Abbey and offsite, have you experienced racism while living in America? And I would say no, namely because it's true that I have never been called a racial slur during this time. I've never had to fear for my health or safety in a public place or because of the way I look or because of my race. So on that level, no. But there was something that happened in college that I will never forget. And I'd like to tell you that story today. And then you can tell me whether I experienced racism in America. So while I was at college, I majored in English. And one week we were assigned to read the book The Bluest Eye, which is Toni Morrison's first novel. And it wasn't a class about race in literature or anything like that. It was a class about how do you read literature that breaks away from a traditional form or uses language in innovative ways. So how do you read books like that? So it was very much about the structure of words and, literary forms. But this book was assigned. And so it was my first time reading a book by Toni Morrison. And I was amazed by this novel. I mean, just the inventiveness of the language, how she really got under the skin of the characters, gave you a sense of their inner life. And in a nutshell, the book is about how racism, intergenerational poverty, and abuse basically destroy the life of a young Black girl. So I was very moved by this book. And I was really excited to come to class and talk about it. So I come to class, and there are maybe about 12 or so people in a seminar with a professor. So the whole class is white. The professor is Jewish, except for me and another boy who is of Indian descent, but he grew up in a Boston suburb. So I come to class excited. And to my surprise, everybody in class really did not resonate with the book. They really disliked the book. People were saying that racism in America is over, is what the class told me, each other. Yeah, people said that the civil rights movement is over. One person said, she's just strong-arming us with this racial message. I so don't get why this book is still relevant today. So for 3 hours, I just sat there in shock. First really? I had such a different experience reading this book. And I was also taking a class on African American theater where the whole class is Black except one boy who's white. So the discussions happening there were very different, let's put it that way. So I was like, wait, what's going on? And somewhere in that class, I started to feel very sad. And I kept waiting for the boy who was of Indian descent to speak up, to say something, but he completely agreed with the rest of the class. So by the time the class ended, I was angry, but I didn't say anything for 3 hours because I really couldn't figure out what to say. So I left the class. And that night I wrote a long letter to my professor. And I basically wrote about how, okay, I am a foreigner and I don't understand race relations in this country, but to my understanding, I'm seeing that the same kind of structure of oppression is happening with new immigrants or other minorities as well, especially, undocumented migrants, low-wage migrants, groups of people who don't have rights in this country. The same kind of structure of oppression is happening culturally, economically, in terms of xenophobic rhetoric in the press. How can you say racism is over, was my question. Yeah, so I wrote this essay. And the professor said, can I send it to the class? I said, sure. So he sends it around. Not a single person responds. Nobody talks to me about this essay. It's like, okay. But no matter what, I felt glad that I had at least expressed my opinion. So I was thinking about this incident at the end of Venerable Jampa's talk the other day, where she said she had met people who said that slavery is over in America. Can we please move on? So I thought, excuse me, slavery is not over. Worldwide, we cannot move on. And so that's why I wanted to speak up about this issue today. Because when I heard the story, was it of Harriet? Is that her name? Harriet, the slave mother. It was so similar to what I know of the migrant domestic worker industry today that I thought, for sure, forms of forced labor, indentured labor, or debt bondage are actually legalized forms of slavery today. I mean, there's no other name for it. We call it human trafficking, right? It's up to every country to figure out how you define that or how you want to argue that definition and what does the law cover. But so let me now tell you the story of what I understand to be what the migrant domestic worker supply chain, for the lack of a better word, is like. And you tell me if you think it sounds similar to the story of Harriet the slave. And I'm describing this industry from a privileged observer perspective. I was raised by 3 migrant domestic workers over time. I collected a lot of their stories when I worked for a theater company, and my job was to interview migrants for a theater production. And then for a period of time, I volunteered with abused domestic workers. So I got to hear from the worker side, what was going on. And then later I worked in the government for 2 years, focused on domestic worker policy in Singapore specifically. So had the opportunity to see what was happening from many, many angles. But a lot of this is captured in a really good report by the Human Rights Watch, I think from 2005, that also involves extensive interviews with workers and kind of details what happens at each stage of the process. So to my knowledge, the story begins often in a rural village where there are very few job opportunities for people in general, much less a young woman. And the first recruiter in the chain is often the village headman. In one story I read, it was the school principal, someone of some standing in the community. And this person is on the lookout for young women who can work overseas, who are healthy and strong, and who, can feed that supply of domestic workers. So sometimes they might groom the family. That's what I've heard. They'll give gifts to the family, cultivate a relationship with the family of this person. Sometimes if the family is in debt, they might help to cover their debt. So basically, developing a relationship. And then when the time is right, like the young woman graduates from school, high school, then it's time to call in the favor. Yeah, you say, we've developed this relationship, I've helped you out. I would really like to send your daughter to work overseas. Yeah. So how much agency there is for the young woman, that's debatable. Because often people will say, these people are poor, we're providing the opportunity for them to work, right? But how much agency you have in terms of what you choose to do, I think is always questionable. And of course, there are many cases too where someone's family is already in debt, then they seek out the recruiter and then they pay a recruiter fee. So to my understanding, the first step is then to help this woman create her paperwork. But maybe let's not call her a woman, she's a girl, very often fresh out of high school. And I think in the rural villages, there's often no birth certificates and things like that. So first you got to make a birth certificate. The age you put on the certificate is whatever the legal age requirement is of the receiving country. Yeah. So receiving country, you see the birth certificate. True or false, you don't know. You got to, she has to do medical tests, right? Get that certification and get a passport made. If she passes the medical test, then this girl is taken to a training center. So in terms of the supply chain visits, I did manage to visit training centers in the sending country. I was really shocked by one of them because the biggest one, it had really high walls with barbed wire around the top. It looked like a prison, and it really makes you wonder why a training center needs to look like that. What's going on? In some of the training centers we went to, so the women get interviewed, and then they get sorted based on the countries that they are going to work in. So at one center, I remember there were all these women wearing full-body burqas, learning Arabic, so they were bound for the Middle East. Some were in t-shirts and jeans and learning Mandarin Chinese, so they would likely be sent to Taiwan or Hong Kong. So I think within that whole structure, there are different ways to determine who goes where. I read a story of one woman who was very disappointed to hear she was going to Singapore. She cried after she was interviewed, mainly because it's known to the workers that there's no minimum wage in Singapore. There's no mandatory day off that's legally protected, things like that. So the more savvy workers know what the rights available in each country are. And, but you don't get to choose where you go. Somehow you are sorted. And they start getting trained. So they're trained in aspects like we saw women learning how to bathe baby dolls, how to clean the floor, because they're coming from very rural village backgrounds, right? And they're going to be shipped off to very urban settings right? Sometimes they have to learn how to use a crosswalk, is my understanding. So just learning how to adapt to this whole different environment and expectations. So usually there's a skills test on the side of the sending country, right? So they're training in all these different skills and they get assessed. So we got to watch that when we visited a training center. What I found very disturbing was when we walked into, because it was a formal visit, all the women would stand up and yell things like, "Good morning, ma'am! Good morning, sir!" I was like, whoa. It's a kind of training in becoming subservient. And it was also disturbing to me that a lot of the middlemen in a lot of the Southeast Asian countries, I mean, the agents, the trainers, are Chinese. Yeah. So that is its own complicated history of race in the region. But that was, to me, very disturbing. So anyhow, there is this whole training process. And then the agents on the sending side compile biodata, so photos of the women, their names, their age, their skills. And that gets sent to the agent in the receiving country. And that's what the agent uses to show to the employer. I have these women on file. They're ready to work. And so that sounded to me a lot like the hiring process for slaves, right? You're looking at this book of all these photos of women, leafing through them, and then you as the employer, you pick this one, this age, this kind of religion. You're picking this human being to come and serve you, right? Or work for your family. So, okay, pick. Right? And then the process starts on how to bring this person into the receiving country, work permit applications. And so the girl finishes her training. If she passes her test in the sending country, there might also be a test in the receiving country. I think Singapore's one is written, so you have to do this written test when you arrive. So it's this whole complicated process of getting from village all the way to the agent's office, where hopefully then you will be assigned to the employer and go back with the employer to start work. So through all these steps of the process though, who is paying for all these different things? Who pays for the birth certificate? Who pays for the passport? Who pays for the medical checkup? Who pays for the agent's fee? Yeah, who pays for the training? The woman, the girl. Yeah, very often all this is bundled up. Sometimes I heard even the recruiter gift from day one. It's all bundled up into this huge fee. So often you wind up signing a 2-year contract where you don't get paid for the first 6 months to a year. That money is, your salary is going to pay back this debt that you have accumulated. This happens for a lot of migrant workers. For the women, it's done, and the domestic workers, I understand, it's done this way. For like the male construction workers, they pay the fee up front. So I've heard, you sell your land, you sell your little home-owned business, you pay upfront $7,000 to get placed overseas. Yeah, but for the women, it happens the other way. I'm not entirely sure why, but basically you're entering into this contract where you will not be paid for 6 months. Legally, it says 6 months. I don't know about now, but could be up to a year. Who knows? Depends on your agent, right? And who is getting a cut of that money, we could never figure out. Sometimes I think even immigration officers, but somewhere along the way, all the different recruiters in the process get a cut. But all this is passed on to the worker. Why? Because they're poor and they want to work somewhere. The terrible thing is that if anything goes wrong in the first 6 months of your employment, yeah, exactly. You haven't been paid. You have to find a way to leave your job and get help. And if it's a legal issue, you can't work anyway, so you can imagine the outcome of that. If you find a new employer, you might have to start the repayment process all over again. So there are cases I've met of women who, didn't get paid for almost a year for all the work they did. In countries like Singapore, I think Hong Kong too, that are very very densely populated already, there's no place for the migrant worker to stay outside. So they stay in the family home, right, in a small room, often in Singapore. And if you don't have a legal day off, you're never going to leave that house. That's where you're working, eating, sleeping, all under one roof with your boss all the time. Can you imagine that? Your work hours are not clear. They could wake you at 10 to help with something, right? You really don't know what kind of job you're signing up for. What if they might have 2 small children, a dog, and an elderly person, plus you have to clean the house. Yeah. So, and then in cases of extreme cases of abuse, yeah, then, the worker might not be allowed to call back. They might be verbally abused or hit, right? And then imagine having to finding a way. How do you even find help, right? Imagine being so isolated. You're alone from your little village. I don't know how you would meet friends if you don't have a day off. You're alone with your boss. You don't know if you can call back. Yeah, I mean, the structure of that kind of employment is just so open to abuse, and in the most extreme cases, it's bad. Yeah. So, yeah, when I think about this, and so many women enter into this process, it's legal. Yeah, and that is the effect of the global capitalist economy. It was very hard for me to hear too about how the slave mothers had their children are taken away from them. So when we think about it, a lot of these, sometimes the older women have children back home. Who's taking care of their kids, right? They're all going overseas to care for other people's kids. There's a whole generation of children in sending countries that grow up without their parents around, or especially their mother, who's sending remittances home, but they never get to see their mother. She comes back for 2 weeks in a year, and that's it. And I will never forget too, when I was 18, one day I was sitting and reading something in the living room. The helper we had was cleaning the floor. And then suddenly she said to me, when you get married and have kids, make sure you call me. And I said, why? She said, I want to work for you. I said, and then she thought about it and she said, maybe I'll be too old then. She said, I will ask my niece to work for you. I don't really have words for how I felt at that time. I did respond that I was not planning to get married, and if I did get married, I wasn't going to have kids. And she got really upset. But that's true. You can see I wasn't lying. So, yeah, that this is generational, but I think it just broke my heart that the best she could see for herself was a lifetime in this of domestic work. There are no other options. She had a college degree, this helper, and she was really good with her money. She was sending it all back to her mom to build a pig farm, and so that they could be self-sustaining. Yeah, so you try your best to uplift your family out of poverty, right? But yeah, so you don't get any kind of pay increase. Yeah, I think your salary is what, $500, $600 for many, many years. The salary increase is like $50 per year. So. Yeah, and that she was thinking she would ask her niece to do this. That was just hard. Yeah. So anyhow, on the broadest level, near the end of my career, I went to the Global Forum on Migration and Development. And that really opened my eyes to all these different things happening worldwide. It helped me see, wow, Singapore is just one receiving country. This dynamic is playing out across the world, where the global, what we call the world's poor, I don't know any better word for it, is desperately trying to find ways to better their lives, entering into these forms of legal migration, or worse, undocumented or illegal migration. Yeah, so anyway, this forum was just challenging all these different definitions and laying out all the human rights issues involved. But the one thing I really took away from the forum was, at the end, this woman from Africa, one of the African delegates, said, look, all these developed countries have labor policies that are increasingly only allowing skilled labor in. Yeah. Don't you think that is discrimination? That from the sending countries now, only the best and the brightest, or people who are very well educated, are allowed to migrate legally and get well-paying jobs. Yeah. All the good doctors in the country have left. She said, what does that leave the sending country with, right? And then the rest are trying to leave illegally, in other ways. And she was pointing out that the very migration and labor policies of developed countries are creating this system. Yeah, so when I heard that, I was just stunned. Maybe for a moment I realized, am I participating in a system that creates those policies? That I wouldn't want to spend my life working in an industry doing that, is what I mean. It kind of made me decide, yeah, I have to leave my job. Yeah, when I look at it from a global perspective like that. But today it makes me think that racism is not a specific national issue. It is enshrined in the dynamics of global migration. Yeah, discrimination and racism are built into these labor policies of every single country in the world that is trying to serve their own interests, right? So they only let certain types or groups or skilled types of people in, and the rest, no, right? Or you're gonna stay on the boat, good luck. And we've seen that worldwide. So yeah, so slavery is not over. And I think it's something we all have to get educated about, to think about, because all of us live in direct connection with migrant workers. Every single country has migrants who are protected to different degrees and are often vulnerable to abuse and do not have rights in the country the way that citizens do. They can be repatriated for all kinds of reasons, right? So that's why they're not on the streets protesting for their rights. You just get repatriated. End of story. So who is going to speak up for or take care of these groups of people? Thankfully, I'm sure there are countless civil society organizations, very often citizens who are putting their own lives at risk or engaging in acts of civil disobedience to protect vulnerable groups of people. So that's what I wanted to share today as a follow-up from Venerable Jampa's talk, that slavery is not over, and it is imperative that we continue to be educated about this issue and take action.